Maya Sterling thought she knew her husband until the day a torrential downpour forced her into the wrong place at the worst possible time. The deluge hit Chicago with a savage and unexpected fury, instantly transforming the late March afternoon into a dense, impenetrable gray curtain. Maya, a woman whose professional life was defined by precision and control, gripped the steering wheel of her elegant BMW X3 with a tension that mirrored the intensity of the storm. Her eyes, normally sharp and evaluative, were strained, fixed on the street that was rapidly dissolving into a turbulent urban stream. At 34 years old, Maya had meticulously carved out a successful career as a high-profile architect. Her iconic modern residential designs graced the most exclusive zip codes in the Gold Coast and its surrounding suburbs. Her schedule was a fortress of back-to-back meetings that rarely left a moment for improvisation. This Tuesday was supposed to be another demanding day, a predictable and structured march toward her professional goals, or so she had confidently assumed before the foundations of her world began their catastrophic collapse. The rain hammered with such implacable force that the windshield wipers, even at their highest and most frantic speed, were hopelessly overwhelmed. Maya felt the drumming on the car's panoramic roof as a physical aggression, a furious, percussive rhythm that seemed to vibrate through her bones. Visibility had plummeted to barely a few yards. She had just endured a grueling 3-hour session with a notoriously demanding client in a stately penthouse near Oak Street, and her only desperate wish was to reach the sanctuary of her home, sink into a boiling shower, and purge the memory of the endless, minute revisions to a multi-million-dollar mansion project that seemed doomed to eternal incompletion. But the storm, it seemed, was an agent of fate with a dramatically different script in mind. As the road became a sheet of blinding, formless water, Maya, trusting years of navigating the city's complex grid, made a split-second decision. She turned sharply to the right, exiting the main avenue onto a quieter, tree-lined side street near the bustling intersection of Michigan Avenue. This area was intimately familiar to her. It was the epicenter of her professional domain. Her gaze settled on a building she had long admired, a beautifully preserved turn-of-the-century structure with a recently restored facade. It now housed a cutting-edge contemporary art gallery on the ground floor and a discreet, sophisticated lounge upstairs. The place was known as the Lumina Gallery and Lounge, and Maya had attended several exclusive high society openings there over the years. Acting purely on instinct and the need for immediate shelter, she parked in the first available spot. Holding her expensive Italian leather bag over her head in a futile gesture of protection, she ran toward the entrance. Her mid-height designer heels clicked with a frantic rhythm against the slippery sidewalk tiles. As she climbed the 3 short steps toward the heavy glass door, the moment she pushed it and stepped inside, a deep sense of relief washed over her, accompanied by a rush of warm, dry air. The atmosphere was rich and complex, a sophisticated blend of aromas, the deep, comforting scent of freshly brewed, high-quality espresso, the subtle fragrance of waxed wood, and a faint, exotic trace of sandalwood incense. The walls were a canvas for bold works of modern abstract art, and the meticulously controlled low lighting cast an intimate golden glow. About 15 customers were scattered throughout the space, some settled into deep, dark velvet armchairs, others standing near the large windows, silently observing the chaos of the storm outside. Maya took off her soaked trench coat, the heavy fabric dripping onto the polished floor, and hung it on a discreet rack near the entrance. Her meticulously styled hair was now damp and messy, and she ran her fingers through it in a vain attempt to restore some order. It was then, as she turned with the intention of approaching the elegant marble bar to order a restorative hot drink, perhaps a strong Earl Grey tea or a thick, dark hot chocolate, that the solid ground beneath her feet seemed to dissolve into an abyss. In the most private and dimly lit corner of the lounge, situated near a wide window overlooking a small, rain-swept interior courtyard, Maya's eyes registered a scene that her highly logical architect's brain refused to process for long, agonizing seconds. Sitting in a deep, worn, brown leather armchair was her husband of 7 years, David Sterling. But the shocking truth was that he was unequivocally not alone. A woman whose blonde, wavy hair fell over David's shoulder was undeniably sitting on his lap. This was not a casual proximity or a friendly encounter. She was literally perched on his thighs, her body leaning into his, her arms intimately linked around his neck in a possessive embrace that screamed a deep, shared history and left absolutely no room for an innocent interpretation. David's left hand was open and possessive on the woman's lower back, his fingers pressing into the delicate silk of her blouse, while his right hand idly held a half-full glass of an expensive Cabernet, an accessory that seemed completely forgotten in the intensity of the moment. The entire world outside the lounge, the raging storm, the city of Chicago, everything ceased to exist. Time for Maya had come to a violent standstill. A cold, nauseating wave surged through Maya's stomach. Her legs began to tremble uncontrollably, a physical manifestation of the seismic shock. Yet she remained rooted to the spot. A statue of disbelief, she was completely unable to look away from the scene of her own destruction. There was no possible mistake, no trick of light or shadow that could explain this. It wasn't a woman sitting near him. It wasn't a platonic, innocent hug. It was the unmistakable, primitive body language of two people who had not only crossed every boundary, but had built a new secret world on the ruins of her marriage. It was at that precise and devastating moment that David lifted his eyes from the woman's face. The resulting eye contact that spanned the entire length of the sophisticated lounge was a brutal, high-voltage electric shock. Maya watched with terrifyingly crystal clarity the exact instant the color drained from her husband's face, leaving him a sickly, ashen gray. His eyes, normally reserved and calculating, widened in sheer, absolute terror. His mouth parted slightly, but the sound, which should have been a denial or a gasp, choked in his throat. His fingers, still gripping the wine glass, went stiff, and his entire body locked up as if an invisible malevolent force had pressed the emergency stop button on his very existence. The blonde woman, absorbed in her own moment, immediately felt the profound change in David's demeanor. She turned her head with an expression of slight irritation to follow the trajectory of his paralyzed gaze. "David?" she murmured, her voice a low, husky sound that was nevertheless perfectly audible in the heavy, sudden silence of the lounge. She tried again with a touch of impatience in her tone. "David, what's wrong? What are you looking at?" The silence, dense and suffocating, was the only response. The woman gave his shoulder a small, frustrated squeeze, trying to pull his attention back to her. "Are you okay? Talk to me." When he remained completely frozen, his eyes fixed on the figure near the entrance, the woman finally reluctantly followed his gaze to its source. And it was in that second that Maya felt the second, far more paralyzing blow, a shock that eclipsed the initial discovery. The woman was Chloe Ashford. Maya recoiled instinctively, stumbling 2 steps back. Her back hit the cold, unyielding surface of the wall, and she had to press a hand against the plaster to keep from collapsing entirely. Chloe, the fiancé of Marcus Thornton. Marcus, the man who had been her unconditional and unwavering friend since their grueling days at the Chicago Institute of Architecture. The man who had been her rock in every professional crisis, every personal triumph, every significant milestone of her adult life. Chloe recognized her simultaneously. Her face, which moments before had been flushed with illicit pleasure, instantly contorted into a grotesque mask of pure and absolute panic. She jumped up from David's lap as if the leather had suddenly caught fire. It was a movement so violent and abrupt that it almost caused the wine glass to fall from David's rigid hand. The glass wobbled precariously, spilling a few crimson drops onto the expensive beige carpet before David, with a last desperate spasm, managed to steady it. Maya did not wait. She did not release the scream clawing at her throat. She did not march across the room to confront them. And she did not demand the answers that were already flagrantly obvious. Instead, she executed a flawless and icy retreat. She turned on her heels and pushed the heavy glass door with a force that made its frame shudder. The rain was still falling with biblical intensity, but she no longer cared. She descended the stone steps, fumbled for the remote to unlock the car with hands that were shaking violently, threw herself into the driver's seat, and slammed the door shut. Her hands were so unsteady that buckling her seatbelt became a complex task of multiple attempts. Her heart was a frantic, trapped bird, beating so fast and loud it felt like it might fracture her ribs. Yet Maya did not cry. Not a single tear escaped. She put the car in gear, the tires spinning momentarily on the waterlogged asphalt, and began to drive with a concept of a destination that was completely devoid of meaning. Her only imperative was distance. She needed to be anywhere but there. She needed a vast, empty space to breathe, to think, to begin the impossible task of processing the catastrophic image now burned into her mind. As she navigated the chaotic, flooded streets of Chicago, the rain a furious and rhythmic assault against the windshield, Maya felt a deep internal fracture. It wasn't just the destruction of her marriage, but the annihilation of a fundamental, unquestioned trust in her own judgment and reality. A trust she hadn't even realized was so vital until it was brutally snatched away. The infidelity of a husband would have been a devastating blow, but the infidelity of a husband with the fiancé of her oldest and dearest friend was a calculated, double-edged cruelty of a magnitude her rational mind was completely unable to comprehend. And as Maya drove aimlessly through the stormy city, a cold and silent certainty began to take shape in the deepest, most resilient part of her consciousness. This was not the end of the story. This was simply the explosive and agonizing beginning of something much larger, much more painful, and infinitely more complex than she could have ever predicted. Maya drove on a purely mechanical level. Her conscious mind was a frantic, repetitive loop of the scene in the lounge. The iconic Chicago landmarks, the towering buildings, the neon signs, and the blurred lights of passing cars were reduced to a wet, meaningless smear outside her windows. Traffic lights changed from red to green, and she obeyed them only by muscle memory, the colors registering without significance. Eventually, she pulled over, realizing she had parked in front of Millennium Park, a vast urban sanctuary where she and David had often strolled on quiet weekend mornings. The park was deserted, its ancient trees whipped violently by the wind and rain. Maya turned off the engine and sat in silence, watching the rivulets of water trace random and complex patterns on the glass. It was then that her phone, resting in the cup holder, began its insistent and shrill clamor. The discordant sound of the ringtone made her flinch violently. She looked at the illuminated screen. David. She let the sound ring, a harsh intrusion into her fragile silence. It rang until it was swallowed by the voicemail system. Seconds later, it started again. David, relentless. Maya leaned over and pressed the side button, silencing the device and placing it back on the console, her gaze returning to the storm. The phone vibrated 5 more times in the following minutes. Maya ignored it. She wouldn't hear his voice. She refused to hear the predictable, rushed excuses, the transparently improvised explanations, the desperate lies born of pure panic. She knew the script by heart. She had absorbed it from countless movies, heard the cautionary tales from friends, and read the cynical accounts online. She knew precisely the hollow phrases he would employ. "It's not what you think. I can explain everything. It was a terrible, isolated mistake." But Maya was not naive, and crucially, she had witnessed the truth with her own eyes. There was no ambiguity or space for a plausible alternative narrative. A woman sitting intimately on a man's lap, arms entwined, bodies pressed together, that image possessed a single undeniable meaning. The phone went silent for a brief, deceptive period, and Maya almost allowed herself to believe he had given up. Then the vibration started again. A quick, insistent buzzing. This time it wasn't calls. It was a torrent of text messages. One after another, the phone pulsed with successive notifications. Maya finally retrieved the device, unlocked the screen, and looked. 23 unread messages, all from David. She didn't open a single one. She simply stared at the rapidly accumulating list of notifications, watching the desperate, truncated "please" scroll across the preview screen. "Please, pick up the phone. I need to talk to you right now. It's not what it looks like, I swear. Just give me a chance to explain, please." Maya locked the screen again and rested her forehead against the cold, hard plastic of the steering wheel, closing her eyes against the crushing reality. The rain had softened, turning into that fine, persistent Chicago drizzle that seems to possess a melancholy and endless duration. The monotonous, repetitive sound of the drops on the car roof created a hypnotic rhythm, a strange and desolate comfort in its predictability. How much time passed? 5 minutes, 30, an hour? Maya had no concept of time. She only knew that when she finally lifted her head with a stiff neck and turned the key in the ignition, a decision had solidified in the cold, clear center of her mind. She wasn't going home yet. No, she couldn't cross the threshold of that apartment, sit on that sofa, or lie in that bed. Not tonight, not while the raw and brutal reality of the betrayal was so fresh and cutting. Maya picked up her phone, ignored David's frantic messages, and opened a hotel booking app. Her fingers moved across the screen with a new, icy determination, searching for nearby high-end options. She secured a reservation at the Langham, an establishment famous for its elegance and discretion in the Loop. She booked a room for one night. Then she reconsidered, her resolve hardening, and changed it to 3 nights. She confirmed the reservation and pulled the car back into the flow of traffic. The drive to the hotel took a quick 15 minutes. When Maya stepped into the large, quiet lobby, her expensive leather bag still damp, and her hair slightly stuck to her neck, none of the staff dared to ask a single question. The receptionist offered a polished, rehearsed smile, handed her the key card to a premium suite, and wished her a pleasant stay. Maya nodded with a brief, expressionless gesture and headed for the elevators. The suite was vast and completely impersonal, decorated in muted, anonymous tones of beige, cream, and slate gray. A massive king-size bed dominated the center of the room, flanked by minimalist lightwood nightstands. The blackout curtains were heavy, designed to completely isolate the outside world. Maya dropped her bag on a velvet armchair near the window, kicked off her designer shoes, and sat heavily on the edge of the bed. It was only then, in the absolute and isolating solitude of that anonymous hotel room, that the tears held back by sheer force of will finally came. They weren't the hysterical sobs of a broken woman, but a silent, incessant torrent, the physical manifestation of a heart that had been irrevocably shattered. The following weeks were a relentless, cold haze of professional efficiency. Maya immediately vacated the apartment she had shared with David, moving into a temporary rental in a high-rise in the bustling West Loop neighborhood. She instituted a strict no-contact policy, communicating with David exclusively through her lawyer, Eleanor Vance. Ms. Vance was a legend in Chicago legal circles, a formidable and inflexible attorney known for her ruthless, pragmatic approach to high-net-worth, high-conflict divorces. David, as expected, launched a campaign of desperate contact attempts, calls, endless text messages, emails, and even a pathetic attempt to show up at her architecture firm, only to be politely but firmly turned away by her highly trained assistant. Maya remained absolutely resolute. She had witnessed the truth and refused to allow him to muddy the waters with more lies or manipulative apologies. The most agonizing conversation, however, was with Marcus. She met him at a quiet, independent coffee shop near the IIT campus, the very place where their decades-long friendship had taken root. "I saw them, Marcus," she stated, her voice normally flat, completely devoid of the emotion churning inside her. "David and Chloe were together, intimately. There's no other way to describe it." Marcus's reaction was a devastating cocktail of initial disbelief, followed by immediate, crushing physical pain. He didn't scream, he didn't deny, he didn't try to argue, he simply hunched over in his chair, burying his face in his hands, his entire body language radiating defeat. "I don't understand," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "We were 2 months away from the wedding. The invitations went out last week." Maya reached across the small table, her hand trembling slightly, and placed it gently on his arm. "I am so incredibly sorry, Marcus. I wish more than anything that it didn't have to be me telling you this." They sat in a deep, heavy silence for what felt like an eternity. Two collateral victims of a shared, brutal, and meticulously planned deception. Maya made the calculated decision to withhold the secret of the potential pregnancy for now. She knew she needed to gather absolutely irrefutable, legal-grade evidence before deploying that particular nuclear option. The emotional impact of the affair was enough to deal with at the moment. She hired the services of a private investigator, a former Chicago PD detective named Elias Thorne, known for his discretion and thoroughness, to dig deep into David and Chloe's financial and medical histories. Thorne was undeniably expensive, but Maya considered the cost a necessary investment in her future peace of mind and her legal standing. She needed to know the full, unvarnished extent of the betrayal. The investigator's report arrived 3 weeks later. It was a thick manila folder filled with bank statements, credit card receipts, and medical records. Maya sat in Eleanor Vance's elegant, minimalist office, her heart beating at a slow, cold, steady pace as she flipped through the pages. The affair, the report confirmed, had lasted for over a year. Their secret meeting place was a luxury short-term rental apartment David had leased in the trendy River North area, the payments for which were cleverly disguised in his corporate expense reports as client entertainment and consulting fees. The receipts meticulously detailed extravagant dinners at high-end restaurants, weekend getaways to Aspen, and most damningly, a series of large, unexplained purchases. "Look at this, Maya," Ms. Vance indicated, her perfectly manicured finger tapping a line on a credit card statement. "Cartier, September 28th, $15,000. Maya looked down at the simple, classic pearl earrings she was wearing, a gift from her mother. "I have never received any jewelry from Cartier." "Then," Eleanor pressed, "who exactly was this purchase for?" Ms. Vance turned the page with a sharp, decisive movement. "And this, a fertility clinic. Multiple major payments pulled from your joint account, all detailed as prenatal care for a pregnancy that, according to your own medical records, was demonstrably not yours." Maya gently closed the file. The volume of evidence was overwhelming, a tidal wave of proof. Now it only remained to select the perfect, most devastating moment to reveal it. The opportunity presented itself a month later at the celebration of David's 35th birthday. His parents, blissfully ignorant of the impending divorce proceedings, had insisted on hosting a massive, opulent party at the Drake Hotel, one of Chicago's most prestigious venues. Maya had received an invitation and decided, with a chilling calm, that she would attend. She arrived elegantly late, a striking figure in a long, form-fitting black gown, her composure absolutely unshakable. The party was in full swing with approximately 70 guests, a mix of David's most important colleagues, high-value clients, and close friends. David saw her the instant she entered the ballroom, and his face instantly paled to the color of white porcelain. He began to move toward her with a desperate, pleading look in his eyes, but Maya was already walking decisively toward the small, raised stage where a microphone and a large projection screen had been set up for the planned toasts. She lifted the microphone from its stand, tapped it lightly, and the resulting sharp, amplified sound instantly silenced the hubbub of the crowd, hushing the entire ballroom. "Good evening, everyone," Maya began, her voice clear, firm, and resonating perfectly throughout the room. "I'm Maya Sterling, and I am David's wife, or perhaps more accurately, his future ex-wife." An audible collective gasp of surprise rippled through the 70 guests. David froze halfway across the room, stranded in the center of the polished floor. "I've been asked to offer a toast to David on the occasion of his 35th birthday," Maya continued, a slight, almost imperceptibly sad smile touching her lips. "And I am going to honor that request. I want to toast to the truth, because the truth, as the old saying goes, will set us free in the end." She stepped to the projector, connected her laptop with practiced ease, and a meticulously organized spreadsheet immediately filled the massive screen. It was a detailed, color-coded breakdown of David's illicit, unauthorized expenses. "Here for your enjoyment is a complete list of the expenses David has incurred over the past year," she explained, picking up a laser pointer and directing the red dot to the screen. "Expenses that were not allocated to our life together, but to his secret parallel life." She highlighted the jewelry purchase with a click. "Cartier, September 28th, $15,000. She touched the simple pearl earrings she wore. "I can confirm that I received no jewelry from Cartier, so the question remains, who was this significant purchase for?" David was now a ghostly shade of white. He tried to push his way toward the stage, but the crowd of guests, now completely captivated and focused on the screen, unconsciously formed an impenetrable human barrier blocking his path. "Next, we have the fertility clinic," Maya continued, her voice maintaining its chilling professional firmness. "Multiple substantial payments pulled from our joint account, all for prenatal care for a pregnancy that, I assure you, was not mine." Audible gasps erupted throughout the room, heads turned, frantically searching for David, then Maya, desperately trying to piece together the drama unfolding. And then Maya pressed play on a different, smaller file. An audio recording began. Chloe's voice, sharp and unmistakable, filled the silent ballroom. "It could be Marcus's, it could be David's. Honestly, I don't know. I did the math, and I was with both during that critical period." The silence that followed the recording was absolute, a vacuum of sound. 70 people remained frozen in a state of complete, shared shock. Maya finally looked up from the screen and scanned the room, her eyes locking onto Marcus's face. He was deathly pale, his eyes wide and fixed on the screen, his mouth slightly open in a silent scream. Beside him, Chloe, who had somehow managed to sneak into the party, was covering her face with her hands in a futile attempt to disappear. "And finally," Maya announced, her voice breaking only slightly, a momentary tremor of the immense pain she contained. "For those few of you who still cling to the hope that this might be some kind of unfortunate misunderstanding." She pressed play on the last and most devastating file. The video clip was brief, lasting only a few seconds. Maya had no desire to inflict unnecessary trauma on the guests, or, more importantly, herself. But it was more than enough to clearly identify the recognizable luxury hotel room, enough to see two figures, David and Chloe, entwined in an unequivocally compromising position. Maya paused the video and, with one last decisive movement, turned off the projector. The room remained in a state of deep and absolute silence. It was the kind of silence that descends when dozens of people simultaneously process a single, devastating emotional bombshell. Maya calmly placed the microphone back in its stand, stepped down from the stage, and began to walk with a slow, deliberate dignity toward the main exit. As she passed Marcus, she paused for a very brief moment, placed her hand gently on his rigid arm, and whispered in a voice heavy with genuine regret, "I am truly sorry, Marcus. You deserve to know the truth." Marcus offered no response. He simply stared unblinkingly at Chloe, his expression a terrifying mask of absolute and pure betrayal that Maya had never witnessed before. Maya continued on her way. She passed David, who remained paralyzed, a statue of shame in the center of the ballroom, with all eyes fixed on him, no one with the courage or the words to intervene. She passed her own mother, who was weeping silently into a handkerchief. She passed David's parents, who seemed to have aged a decade in the span of 10 minutes. Then she walked out through the massive, ornate main doors of the Drake, stepping into the cool, purifying night air of Chicago. Her car was waiting exactly where she had parked it. Maya slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove away. She didn't look back in the rearview mirror even once. Whatever chaos, recrimination, or consequence was now exploding inside that ballroom was no longer her burden. She had delivered the truth, and the truth, as it always does, had unleashed its own devastating and undeniable power. In the days that immediately followed, the fallout from Maya's public revelation unfolded with a terrifying speed and finality, exactly as she had coldly predicted: swift, brutal, and completely irreversible. Marcus called Maya early Sunday morning. His voice was raspy and raw, the sound of a man who hadn't slept and likely couldn't. "I need to talk to you," he said, skipping any pretense of a greeting. "I know," Maya replied, her own voice quiet and steady. "Where would you like to meet?" They agreed on a secluded, quiet cafe on the edge of Lincoln Park, a place far from the prying eyes of the city's social scene. When Maya arrived, Marcus was already there, occupying a corner table with a half-empty cup of cold coffee in front of him. He looked completely devastated. Deep purple circles underlined his eyes. His hair was disheveled, and his clothes looked as though he had thrown them on without a thought. Maya slid into the seat across from him, maintaining a respectful silence. "It's over," Marcus finally said, the words heavy and definitive. "Last night I gave her back the ring, I canceled the venue, and I sent a mass message to all the guests informing them that the wedding is off." "I am so incredibly sorry, Marcus." "Don't be," he countered, lifting his head to meet her gaze for the first time. "You did the right thing. If you hadn't done what you did yesterday, I would have married her. I would have committed to spending the rest of my life believing a lie." "Still," Maya insisted gently, "I know this pain is immense." Marcus let out a short, bitter, humorless laugh. "Immense, Maya? I invested 10 years of my life in that woman. 10 years believing I knew the person sleeping next to me. And I found out last night in front of 70 people that I knew absolutely nothing, that the woman I was about to marry was not only cheating on me with my best friend's husband, but might be expecting his child." Maya allowed the deep silence to settle and linger between them. "Are you going to ask for a paternity test?" she asked, her tone even. "No," Marcus replied, shaking his head decisively. "That is not my problem to solve. If the child turns out to be mine, Chloe can contact me when she has irrefutable proof. Until that moment, I want no involvement with her or her life." He finally picked up the cup of coffee and took a large sip, grimacing. It was ice cold. "And you?" he asked, returning the question. "How are you really handling it?" Maya paused, considering her response with the precision of an architect. "Strangely, I feel a deep sense of peace. I think it's because I had weeks to process the truth, to prepare myself. I had the knowledge. You were hit with the full, brutal reality all at once. That's why you waited until the party, to make sure you had all the evidence before telling me." "Yes," she confirmed. "I couldn't come to you with a mere suspicion. Naturally, you would have become defensive, and Chloe would have easily fabricated a counter-narrative. I needed proof that was irrefutable, both legally and emotionally." Marcus nodded slowly, accepting her logic. "And David? What are the consequences for him?" "Divorce," Maya stated plainly. "The papers are already being finalized, and as for the professional consequences—" She paused, a flash of cold satisfaction in her eyes. "I don't have to lift another finger. The guest list of that party included his CEO, his most important clients, and his direct colleagues. His reputation in this city is already irrevocably destroyed." And so it was. Maya learned through the efficient, whispering network of mutual friends that David had been placed on indefinite administrative leave from his high-profile tech startup. Although officially a leave of absence, everyone understood what it was: a polite corporate firing. A tech company, especially one that prided itself on a progressive and ethical public image, couldn't afford to have a senior executive publicly exposed in such a sordid high society scandal. Chloe also faced immediate and severe consequences. Her jewelry boutique, which relied almost entirely on the delicate ecosystem of social media and word-of-mouth recommendations among the Chicago elite, saw its sales plummet into an abyss. Clients canceled custom orders. Major commissions were abruptly withdrawn. In less than 2 weeks, Chloe was forced to close the shop, placing a curt, simple notice on the locked glass door, temporarily closed due to unforeseen personal circumstances. Maya felt no surge of triumphant satisfaction at this news. Her actions had never been motivated by revenge, but she felt no pity either. Actions have consequences. And adults, she thought with a final coldness, must live with the choices they make. The divorce proceedings, considering the explosive circumstances, were surprisingly swift and unopposed. David offered no resistance. He didn't try to fight for the division of assets. He signed every document Eleanor Vance placed before him with the silent, defeated resignation of a man who knew he had absolutely no legal or moral ground to stand on. Maya retained ownership of their luxury condo. She was financially capable of maintaining it on her own and refused to allow David to keep even a fraction of the ownership of the space he had so completely profaned. David was left with a small portion of his savings, his car, and full responsibility for the mountain of credit card debt he had accumulated during his affair. As for the potential paternity, a clear agreement was reached. If a DNA test confirmed David was the father of Chloe's child, he would assume full financial responsibility as stipulated by law, but Maya would have no involvement or contact with the situation. 3 months later, the final divorce decree was signed and filed. Maya Sterling was officially and legally free. She didn't celebrate the occasion. She simply signed the final papers on a quiet Thursday afternoon in Ms. Vance's office and then immediately returned to her studio, treating the monumental event as nothing more than a completed administrative task, because in the cold, hard light of her new reality, that is precisely what it was. Maya's life began its slow and deliberate return to a new normalcy. It wasn't the normalcy of her past. That reality was irrevocably shattered, but a new, carefully constructed rhythm that was, in many profound ways, much healthier and more authentic. She threw herself into her work with a renewed, almost fierce intensity. She began to accept challenging, high-profile projects she might have turned down before. She traveled extensively, giving talks at major architecture conferences in New York, London, and San Francisco. She began guest lecturing at prestigious universities on the critical importance of sustainable design and the preservation of historic structures. And slowly, with the cautious step of a deep thaw, Maya began to allow herself to truly live again, not simply to survive the wreckage, but to embrace a vibrant, forward-looking existence. She adopted a dog from a shelter, a magnificent 7-year-old German shepherd named Max, who had been abandoned by his previous owner and had the cautious, wary look of an animal that had learned the world could be cruel and unpredictable. Maya and Max formed an immediate and deep bond. Both had been betrayed. Both were immersed in the slow and meticulous process of rebuilding trust, one small, tentative step at a time. Maya also committed to regular therapy sessions with a highly recommended counselor, Dr. Cecilia Reed. She did this not because she was on the verge of collapse, but because she was determined to process the trauma in the healthiest way possible. She wanted to ensure she didn't carry any unresolved emotional baggage into the future she was building. 10 months after her divorce was finalized, at a major international architecture summit held in New York, an event that drew architects, thought leaders, urban planners, and designers from across the globe, Maya met Julian. She was sitting in a session focused on sustainable innovation in large-scale rehabilitation projects, diligently taking notes, when the man next to her leaned over and offered a witty and insightful comment on the presentation. They struck up a conversation. Initially, the talk was strictly professional, then drifted toward the complexities of urban life, then back to a shared passion for architecture, and finally settled on the deeper personal aspects of life. Julian Beaumont was also an architect based in New York, specializing in bespoke luxury residential projects. He was 42 years old, had a kind, open face, and 2 children from a previous marriage that had ended amicably 3 years earlier. He possessed an easy, genuine smile that had the power to completely light up his features. There were no sudden dramatic sparks or an immediate, overwhelming attraction. Instead, there was a quiet and profound connection. There was a natural ease in their conversation. There was the deeply comforting feeling of talking to someone who truly listened to her words and genuinely valued her perspective. They exchanged contact information and began a steady exchange of text messages. Then came the long, late-night phone calls. Julian began to invent increasingly flimsy excuses to visit Chicago more frequently. Maya, in turn, began to accept new projects on the East Coast that required her to be closer to New York. When they finally shared their first kiss 4 months after that initial meeting at the summit, it occurred during a quiet evening walk along Chicago's lakefront trail, with the setting sun painting the city's vast skyline in stunning shades of orange, fire, and deep violet. The kiss was gentle, hesitant, a mutual exploration, but it felt absolutely and profoundly right. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Maya?" Julian asked afterward, holding her hands gently and studying her face with sincere concern. "I know you've been through a lot. I don't want to pressure you into anything." "I'm ready," Maya replied, her voice firm and honest. "Not because I've forgotten what happened, but because I've learned that the events of the past do not and will not define my future." And she meant it. She really did. 1.5 years after the devastating scandal at the birthday party, Maya was sitting in a comfortable chair in an obstetrician's office, her hands tightly held by Julian's, both of them staring intently at the ultrasound monitor. "Congratulations," the doctor announced with a warm, professional smile. "You are expecting a healthy baby girl." Maya felt the familiar, warm surge of tears running down her face. But they were good tears, tears of pure, absolute joy and gratitude. Julian squeezed her hand, his own eyes shining brightly with deep emotion. They had married 6 months earlier in a small, deeply intimate ceremony held in Chicago's Garfield Park Conservatory, attended only by their closest family and a few select friends. Marcus was there, standing proud as Maya's man of honor. He had eventually recovered from Chloe's betrayal. He was now dating someone new, a kind and centered yoga instructor he had met through mutual friends, a woman whose gentle and honest spirit was precisely the balm his wounded heart needed. Julian had moved permanently to Chicago after the wedding, establishing a successful branch of his architecture firm in the city. Together they bought a house, not another sterile condo, but a real, spacious house with a large, established garden located in the desirable suburb of Evanston. Ironically, it was only a few towns away from where Maya had once lived with David, but this house was fundamentally different. It was theirs. It was a home built not on pretense, but on the solid foundation of truth, mutual respect, and unwavering commitment. As Maya entered her 3rd trimester, she finally received the last definitive update on Chloe and the baby. Marcus mentioned it casually over coffee, noting that Chloe had given birth to a baby girl 3 months earlier. The paternity test had confirmed, beyond a doubt, that David was the father. He was paying the mandatory child support but had decided to waive any regular custody or visitation rights, a decision that Marcus had heard was entirely David's. Chloe, Marcus added, had moved away, relocating to a smaller, quieter town in the Pacific Northwest, far from the social memory of the Chicago scandal. There, she had opened a small new craft shop, attempting to rebuild her life away from the wreckage she had created. Maya absorbed this information with a complex mix of emotions. A small part of her felt a distant pang of sadness, not for Chloe or David, but for the innocent child born into such a chaotic situation. A larger, dominant part of her felt a quiet sense that justice, in its own slow and inevitable way, had run its natural course. People had faced the consequences of their actions. Life for everyone involved had moved on. "Have you ever considered getting in touch with him?" Julian asked her one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting protectively on Maya's large, rounded belly. "With David, now that you are both about to be parents?" Maya considered the question for a long moment. "No," she finally stated, "and I won't. What happens in his life is no longer my business, Julian. He made his choices. I made mine. And now our paths are permanently and completely separate." Julian leaned over and kissed her forehead tenderly. "You are a much better person and have more class than I would in this situation." "I'm not better," Maya corrected him gently. "I've simply learned that holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and foolishly expecting the other person to die from it. David doesn't deserve any more space in my mind or my heart." When Maya and Julian's daughter finally arrived on a clear, crisp November morning, with the bright sun streaming through the windows of the maternity ward at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Maya held the tiny, perfect baby in her arms and was overwhelmed by a feeling she hadn't anticipated: gratitude. Not gratitude for the betrayal, never that, but a deep gratitude for the difficult and painful path that the betrayal had ultimately forced her to take. Because if David hadn't cheated on her, if Maya hadn't discovered the truth, if she hadn't found the courage to end the marriage and meticulously rebuild her life, she would never have met Julian. She would never be holding this precious baby. And she would never have found this beautiful, authentic life. Their daughter was named Grace, and as Maya gazed down at the baby's tiny, perfect face, feeling Julian's strong presence beside her and Max, her loyal German shepherd, faithfully at the foot of the hospital bed, she understood a fundamental, life-changing truth. True happiness doesn't come from never being hurt. It comes from possessing the inner strength to rise again when you are. It comes from the unwavering refusal to allow someone else's weakness or betrayal to define your own worth. It comes from choosing the difficult truth over comfortable denial, even when that truth is brutal. And most importantly, it comes from having the quiet patience and deep faith that after the most violent storm, the sun will always shine again. Maya kissed Grace's forehead with infinite tenderness. "Welcome to the world, little one," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "And welcome to the life I built for us. An honest life. A real life." And in that singular, perfect moment, surrounded by her new and true family, with the future stretching out before her like a blank page waiting to be filled, Maya finally let go of the past completely. Not with lingering anger, not with corrosive bitterness, but with the quiet and unwavering dignity of a woman who had looked the truth directly in the eye, refused to back down, and had emerged on the other side infinitely stronger, immeasurably wiser, and profoundly, beautifully free. If you liked my story and want to hear more, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. If you'd like to support me, you can do it through Super Thanks. It would mean a lot. In the comments, tell me which city you're watching from and what time it is, so I can see how far my story reaches. I've added 2 more life stories on the screen just for you. Click one now, and let's keep spending time together. Much love. See you soon.